Welcome to the first episode of Lake Avenue Church podcast, and we call it the kitchen table. The reason I call it the kitchen table is I'm going to use it as a metaphor. We are not sitting in a kitchen, and unfortunately, we don't have any food item except a glass of water, a bottle of water. But the idea of this is that a family time, a family gathering where we all come together to have a conversation. My name is Mathew P John. I am the pastor of missional outreach here at Lake Avenue Church. And some of you know that I am from the eastern part of the world. I am from India. And I have noticed that when I came to the West, and there are two places where the families gather. One in a car, on a road trip, all the families come together. Then in the kitchen table, around the kitchen table, the dad and the mom and the kids come together and they have conversation. And quite often, the conversation can be contentious. They may disagree on some stuff. But at the end of the day, they are family. So it's okay to disagree. The relationship doesn't change. So that's why we wanted to use this as that the kitchen table as a metaphor. So we have members from the Lake Avenue Church family, and eventually, hopefully, we can extend this to the whole Big C Church family, and then the whole world, who knows, as humanity itself as a family. So today I have two of my friends and colleagues with me in this conversation. And the first person I'm going to introduce is Amara Ononiwu, who is an outreach coordinator for Lake Avenue Church. And she particularly in the area of housing and homelessness. And she is mostly famous for the community meals we serve at this church for homeless people every Sunday except the first Sunday. So the second, third, and fourth Sundays, we serve community meal. And as we are talking about this right now in the middle of a pandemic, even now, this is one department functioning without any problem. We are still serving the community meal. Obviously, we are taking all the precautions and all that, but we are still doing that. So I really applaud Amara and her team for continuing to do this. And she's also an event designer part-time. And she's also part of FCC, which is the Faith Community Committee, which is, where the faith communities come together to discuss some of the policy decisions that is to be made in the government and all that kind of stuff. And she is asked to chair this. And she's still deciding whether she's going to chair it or not. But so she's a very important person. I'm just great to, it's my privilege to work with her on a daily basis in my department. Now, the next person who's sitting with me is Tsega Worku. About everything else I'm going to say, but he is my friend, and he and his wife and their amazing children have been our friends for at least 6 or 7 years, and we attend the same small group. So our connection goes beyond Lake Avenue Church. And he is the director of counseling ministries here at Lake Avenue Church. Did I say his full name? Tsega Worku. Okay, Tsega Worku. He's the director of counseling at counseling ministries at Lake Avenue Church, and he is by profession a marriage and family therapist. So that is very, very interesting. And particularly from my perspective, the main reason I attend that small group with me and my wife Joanne, with Tsega and his wife Kidest, and there is another couple who are he's also a marriage and family therapist. So that's the secret of the success of our marriage. And I attend the small group with this marriage and family therapist. So we've been married for 22 years and keep going because of the small group mainly. So I'm grateful. And also, he also serves in the counseling department, counseling ministry at Faithful Central Church, which is one of the biggest mega churches in Los Angeles, as you all probably know. So today, the main thing that is obviously burning in all our minds, Tsega and Amara and all our audience, is we were in the middle of a pandemic, the biological pandemic, and then came this racial pandemic per se, right? And that is wreaking havoc in our society. Now, as I said, I'm from India, so I am conveniently categorized as a person of color. And people ask my opinion, but this is not a place for my opinion. But I have always noticed, even though I am a person of color, in this country, black people in particular have a unique kind of experience per se, right? Like we all look at the world through a particular angle, a worldview, I'm from the world of filmmaking, so a camera angle we all have, and I think the black people have a very different experience of the world and America in particular and the church and all that. I don't think that I have the credibility to speak into that, even though I am categorized as a person of color, because I'm an immigrant. My experience is very different, even though it has its own uniqueness. So first I want to hear from you. How do you look at the world right now? And what do you see as a black person right now when you look at the world? Take a couple minutes to talk about that, and then we will come to the specific questions, which is more connected to your areas of interest and expertise. So, Amara, would you start with your own way of what do you see now? What do you see now, which I can't see? Yeah.
That's such an interesting question. Because I often think that how I see the world is sort of like an alien, and that I often see things that that people I think they see but don't talk about. So I think if I were to answer that for the moment that we're in, I see a lot of things. I see a lot of hurt and pain that has been there, but has risen to the surface for so many people who maybe haven't had the experience or haven't been listening, or I think there's a myriad of whys. So I see a lot of pain, but I also see a lot of hope. And this is where I can't unlink my faith from my lens. And so I like to fight to see the world the way God sees the world, because I think ultimately that is going to serve me more than even my own lens. So it's often informed by that. So I see a lot of hope in that. What God is doing in this moment is something so much greater than what I can even see. But I have faith that in the inner workings that are happening in people. And the evidence of that is by conversations that I've had, revelations that have been shared with me, and even my own revelations, and just in my time with God. So I see a lot of fear, a lot of hurt, and a lot of revelation happening all at the same time, which is challenging and exhausting, and also exciting in a way that doesn't take away from the gravity of a moment, but is hopeful in what God is doing, because it feels huge. And there's a little bit of, this is going to sound weird, but there's a little bit of gratitude of being able to be a part of this moment and to affect the spaces that I can impact in the way that God has created me, and having that same hope for each person as we move forward. So,
yeah. Amara, I just wanted to appreciate that comment in particular. And one thing I forgot to mention is that we also have another angle as a Christian, from a faith community. And this, we have staff meeting every week, and Amara and John Bolin are the two black people in our staff, and when we have this conversation, all of us tend to get very dejected. We are all very feeling very depressed about what is happening, then I see, we are all having Zoom meeting, and we see from the window of Amara and John Bolen this bubbling hope. And if you move that, you can see she's always smiling. And I always wonder, how could she smile? People say that about me. Why are you always smiling? Some people find it annoying, because people don't like smiling. But Amara and John Bolen, these are the two black people. And they say, no, guys, don't worry. There is hope at the end of it. And that always challenged me. And I just wanted to take that moment to appreciate that even now, that spirit I wanted to go more into some of the details of what you said. The vocabulary you used is very explicitly Christian and spiritual, and I really appreciate that. So, Tsega, I would like to hear the same thing from you too. So, yeah.
You just reminded me as you're reflecting back on Tamara's comment. Somebody said the other day how when you look at the church services in African American communities, especially after George Floyd's death, you listen to what's being said in there and you're like, really? This is because it's about hope, it's about forgiveness, it's about moving forward. And there's something about, I think, that resiliency that you see in the community. If not just as a human being, sometimes it's scary how far people can be pushed to the extreme. But anyway, that's just to reflect back on what Amara just said. But I think you asked a question about our experience, and when I think about my experience, there are many different levels that I see that I'm experiencing this experience in our world. One, as an immigrant, I'm originally from Ethiopia. As a black person, man, as a therapist, as a father and husband, and as a Christian, which also adds another flavor into it, which sometimes it's hard to relate to other people that may not be Christians. And then also as the director of the counseling ministry here at Lake, there are certain expectations. So it's an advantage, but also it's a challenge. There are times when you're expected to know certain things or to be well-informed when you're not. But then you also get the privilege of being in certain situations because of who I am. So I've learned so much in the last 8 years being at Lake that if I wasn't here, I wouldn't have learned. There's just no way. There are times when we went to conferences with the staff to Memphis, to this conference of multi-ethnic churches and how do they work. And then I'm part of the racial reconciliation team. And I'm telling you, every time I'm in there, I learn one more thing. I learn one more thing here. And of course, as a therapist, I get to synthesize that into my own thinking and how do I use it. So sometimes I feel like I am more privileged than most people because of who I am as a person. Being black has been an advantage in some ways. Now, the challenge is usually people say, but don't you experience racism? Don't you see it? And I think there's a part of me that's maybe a little bit naive, where I grew up. There's always that issue of respect your elders. That's how we grew up. So we always give way to the other person first. And some people may see that in a different way, but culturally there's this other experience that I have. So I think what summarized it for me was we were going through this racial reconciliation part 1 a while back, and we did this privilege walk exercise. So we went to the parking lot where all of us lined up, and there were these questions being asked, and you take one step forward if it's true. And then we kept doing that, and at the end, we stopped and we looked around, and I found myself like smack in the middle. And it's almost like you lose your identity. You're like, so who am I? Because I'm not up front with the rest of my brothers and sisters who are, maybe Caucasians. And then I'm not back there with my brothers and sisters who are African Americans. And I'm in the middle. We have some Asians in there. And I reflected back, and it helped me to see, I am somewhat privileged because of my first 20 years of my life growing up in Africa. My experiences are different. But then I'm not also that different because I'm not anywhere in the front either because of my experiences here. But I think all that gets balanced out when I think about my children. Now, I may have that, but my children don't have that experience. So I always wonder, where would they fit into this whole spectrum? So I think all that to say, the way I view it is, it's very complicated. It's not a very simple one-fits-all perspective.
Yeah.
Depending on our developmental stage, a teenager and a 50-year-old have totally different experience. And like I said, being an immigrant, being a male, Black, being a therapist, a Christian, all that kind of complicates it. But definitely, I feel like God is on the move. I think He's challenging all of us individually. I love what you said a while back when we had this crisis, how you can see yourself as the person who's putting his knee on somebody else, killing. And then you can also see yourself as the person, as George Floyd, being killed. So it's almost like we have both in us that we're struggling with, and that needed to be called out. And that really helped me to be more humble and to be more repentant towards God.
That's a conversation we had at the Illuminus.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. At the Illuminus, yes, you're right. So, that was helpful.
I just wanted to pick on one particular point you said, Tsega, because this would be my first formal question to you too. The family dynamics is very interesting. You're talking about your daughters, and my daughters are kind of the same age. And they were born and raised in Canada. So they have a completely different worldview from me, who's as an immigrant, right? I still remember, funny story. They went and told their teacher, they were going to a very, we lived in a very white neighborhood. And so they told their teachers that they are from an interracial family. They said their dad is Black and their mom is white. So Joanne is white, and that's what they thought, because they didn't know, right? And I am, Joanne is more fairer than I am. So they thought that's what they thought. They thought their mom was white and I was Black, because they didn't know anything else about race. So they have a completely different view. Now, as a, help me here as your experience as a therapist. Amara, please join in that too. I want to learn from you, because, see, Lake Avenue Church, or any church for that matter, is a family. And I heard from a preacher, God's best answer to the racial problem is a multi-ethnic church. And amen to that. Amen to that. I've been in many monocultural churches. It has its own advantage. But multicultural church is such a learning experience for me, and I really enjoyed being in that kind of church. But again, that brings its own issue, right? Like, like in any family, that's the whole idea of a kitchen table conversation, right? So how would you use your experience in the family and marriage therapy to help me as a pastor to navigate through the racial tensions in my own family, which is the church, right? Not Lake Avenue Church in particular, but general. Can you give us some insights to, both me and Amara?
I think I understood your question clearly. So the question is, when do families usually come to therapy? Usually therapists, we thrive on crisis, because that's when people come to therapy. If not, they will not. But that's the reason they come to therapy. But what they get out of therapy is hopefully a whole lot more than the reason why they came in for. So you may come in because you have a conflict with your teenager, because they want to stay up late or whatever, and it has gotten out of control and you've waited way too long. But then once you come in and start working on those issues, you find out everybody has different interests, and you actually walk away almost forgetting why we even come to therapy, because we have worked on so many stuff that as a family, you become better. As a family, you feel like, wow, it's almost like you want to go back and be thankful for that crisis, because if it wasn't for that crisis, we wouldn't be where we are today. We don't want to be in that crisis, but again, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't get the help. So my big issue is there's a bias between our biological family and our spiritual family. The way we see our spiritual family, when we say our Lake Avenue family, do we really mean that? Do we have the same tolerance for the youth in our church as we do to our biological kids? I've seen families who will go out of their way not to lose relationship with their own children. I've seen couples do all kinds of stuff not to go through divorce, not to lose one another. But somehow when we come to the church and it's a spiritual family, there's this option, I don't like how the pastor said, so I'm going to go to a different church. Or this is not good, so we're going to deal with it. So there's almost like this lack of commitment sometimes that I see, which is okay in some ways, but what it does is it deprives us from experiencing that extra outcome of that. So there's someone who says conflict is a doorway to intimacy. So if we can really handle a conflict well, with commitment, with full honesty and transparency, then it will actually get us closer to one another. So a lot of people spend a lot of time avoiding conflict, understandably, because it's not a positive experience. But if we can handle it well, it actually brings us together. So my hope is, who would think in the middle of pandemic to have this kind of protest and the picture of the protest is just so heartwarming because you see people from all kinds of walks and backgrounds that there's something that's been shaken. So now the question is the church going to handle it well with commitment to one another, to God, and to really work through it? Because I really believe it's an opportunity to get closer to one another, but also for God to use us in a mighty way. But if the work is going to be how to stop this, how to quench it and kind of move on and stop all the problems, then I feel like we can miss an opportunity. So if we see it that way, if there's a commitment, like, my children, Matthew, they're both adopted. And sometimes I forget what that means. Because for me, I don't know, having your own biological children, I don't think there's any different. I've seen a friend of mine, somebody that I really respect, his daughter went through so much stuff. And I remember my comment to him was, what I witnessed was how far a father is willing to go not to lose his daughter, not to lose that relationship. And we see it here in counseling, also in Lake Avenue Church. Parents and grandparents are in a lot of pain because there's a lot of conflict between generations, and we see a lot of kids leaving the church, but they will go out of their way not to lose relationship with their biological children. And I think if we do the same commitment in our church family, if it's really, I know I'm a human being too, so I have my shortcomings, but I feel like it should even be more so in our church family. Our spiritual children are even more important than our biological children, and how we treat them, how we commit to them. So if that is there, then God will help us. In therapy, there's no magic, All it is people who are desperate will come and are willing to be vulnerable and give it time, pay for that time, and really open up themselves to one another. And usually they're the ones who come up with a solution. It's not even the therapist telling you what to think. You find out your own solution, but you have to God has to take you to that holy ground. And you see that burning bush, and that's when things happen. And I think how can we do that as a family? Then we can expect to experience God's work.
It's very interesting you said that, because very often we use this Christianese, right? Like even the way I casually use, this is my church family. How much do I mean that? You're basically questioning me and challenging me. That's very good. Because, in church we always use that, you have your real family and then the church is your extended family kind of, But in one of my sermons back in the days I used, and it was quite shocking for people, I said, your real family is the church, because I said, look at the person who is sitting next to you, right and left. Whether you like it or not, you're going to stuck with them for eternity. Because your earthly family is going to be done when you're dead, right? They are not going to come back with you unless they are, people of faith. That's different. So I said, you're going to stuck with these people forever. Whether you like it or not, you better start liking them, because you are going to see them for eternity. That's your real family. And your extended family is kind of your earthly family, kind of turned it around. And this is an interesting, and also thank you for saying that, because conflict is a way to intimacy, right? So, Amara, and in your own world, and you also work with children, by the way. Amara does so many different things, and I only picked a couple of things. But even in your own world, how do you see this conflict and intimacy, inherent connection between them working out? Just wonder your feedback on that.
See, I think in the honest conversation that we have to have in the church is that Jesus already modeled this. And what I think how this relates is like the simplicity in which we teach children, we forget as adults. And it's going back to that core. As I listened to Tsega talking about how far someone would go for a relationship, I'm like, is that not the story of Jesus? Is that not God throughout the entire scriptures? And how do we forget that when we engage in church, when we're only the church because of that? So it's often like we forget our origins. We're not here to just be with one another. We're here on mission. We're here to model what Jesus already modeled for us. That is our number one responsibility. So at any point in our lives when we're not modeling that, we are out of alignment. And we have to call ourselves back. And that's why we have community to call us back to that mission. But I think long churches have forgotten, and we've gotten comfortable in just being. Like we come to a church and not to get on people who, like, I understand the isolation right now, but the fact that you cannot enter a church, Jesus does not cease, and neither does the mission, because we are the church. And so long before there were buildings, permanent buildings to meet in, we were that. So that's the core of faith. And so that when conflict comes up, I will go as far as I need to bring reconciliation, because that is what I'm called to do, if I truly believe the things that I espouse. So I really think it's a gut check, it's a heart check, it's a come to Jesus moment every day. I think this is what the Bible talks about, like where we pick up our cross daily. This is not easy. But I think it's important, and we lose sight because we look to programs and we look to things and all the things that we've created, and we do not look at the vision and the mission and the core of why we exist. Because there's plenty of places I can find social activity. The church is not for that. That's a beautiful byproduct of it, but we are together for a reason. And we forget that reason. And that's why we let people fall by the wayside. It's the reason why we can look at conflict and want to squelch it, because we can't see the alignment. This is the commission. We have to, like, I have to reconcile with you because my God tells me I have to. Wow. And then if I stop obeying in that one area, then how many other areas am I just going to become my own God? And I think that's what we do. And we don't like to think of it that way, but that's what happens. We take God out of the driver's seat and we say, nope, I'm going to be God of this part of my life.
Wow. Amen and amen. Oh my, when I'm hearing this, I feel kind of, how do you say that? Feel inferiority complex. Why do I get to go to the pulpit as a pastor? Because I'm hearing an amazing sermon, Amara. I didn't want you to even stop. And thank you, Tsega. We are going to wrap up this conversation right now. But don't worry, we are not going anywhere. We are coming back with the second episode, the same conversation. Tsega and Amara are both going to be with me, and we are going to continue to some important details of the conversation. Thank you for joining here at the Kitchen Table Lake Avenue Church podcast. God bless you. See you soon.